The Witch in the Wood by T.H. White. Chapter 23. The tide, or something of this sort, must have been wrong for fishing, for when the sun rose over the moors and poured on Lothane Castle with horizontal beams, all the villagers were still in bed. It was a glorious spring morning, which steeped everything in happiness. The sea lay smooth and burnished, stretching away from the lonely coast, and there was such a consort of birds that you would have wondered how anybody could sleep at all. First, while it was still dark, the redshanks started their piping on the ocean banks. Then the curlews bewailed their beauty and their long noses. Then some widgeon, going into Abraham's bosom, passed over invisible, crying woo-wee, woo-wee. After this, and after the black guard of hoodie crows, rooks and jackdaws had moved away from the dreary pine wood with their merry cheers of squalor. The landbirds woke up. There was a wee burn running down to the harbor, and beside this 2 blackbirds struck out as if the world had just been born. People used to talk about the nightingale, because they hear it when nothing else is singing, so that its lovely voice stands out. But what about the ancient mavis of Lothane, that voice of water which celebrates the love of God beside the water, so that burn and bird are mixed together? These 2 birds now poured out their passionate hearts more sweetly than 1,000 nightingales, for they were singing of the rosy spots on the trout in the burn below them, and of the spring green now coming to that lime-like brilliance which goes so soon, and of their own black bodies and bright bull's eyes. Only one human person was ever more beautiful than the mavis, and it was he who sang about the ostlecock, so black of hue with orange tawny bill. King Pellinore woke up in his drain, feeling perfectly splendid. Such was the goodness of the landlord Pudsy's mead, that there was not a headache in a hogshead of it, and King Pellinore lay upon his back at the bottom of the hole, listening to the blackbirds. He stared up at the blue sky, and thought how lovely it all was, but at the same time it was a bit puzzling what, and so he decided it would be best to go to sleep once more. The next people to wake up were the Cornwall children. The pile of rugs, dogs, straw, fur, and clothes in their bedroom made a sort of heaving and rose into a peak like a tent. Then the outskirts of the tent began rolling about on their own account, and several greyhounds, wolfhounds, and so forth got up out of it, and sat about thoughtfully, wondering whether they were awake or not. As soon as the tent collapsed a bit, and showed an opening, these various dogs made heavy and sleepy pounces into the middle of the opening, and there they curled up again at once, between one pair or another of drowsy bare arms, which came out to love them. The blackbirds went on singing outside the window. In the east tower of the castle, Sir Grummore and Sir Palomides made a snorting noise. Sir Palomides had his arms round the neck of the questing beast, and Sir Grummore was embracing its tail, which tickled his nose. They had bumped their behinds together, and this was why they snorted. But in another minute they had snuggled their noses into the various ends of their beast, and were fast asleep once more. Mother Morland, who had drank no more than she was accustomed to drink, turned round in the little cupboard which she used for a bed, and looked at the window. This window was not more than 6 inches square, and it was filled with horn. Mother Morland opened one eye at it very cautiously, and then the other. After this she shut both eyes and went to sleep again, satisfied that she had not drank too much the night before. High in the royal chamber of the castle the witch stirred in her uneasy sleep. She had not enjoyed too much to drink, had no charmers, like the wolfhounds, to leap into her arms. Only oodlums, dovekins, sweetie-peety, ucky-ducky, and ickle petty-wetty lay in various frowsy holes about her bed. She and they were entirely surrounded by hot water bottles, now dead and horrible. Queen Morgause turned over complainingly in her bed, half thinking of the way in which she would tell everybody that she had not slept a wink. Then she and Ucky Ducky and all the rest of them were deep again in stupor. Still the blackbirds sang. The next place where there was a move was the boys' room for the second time. An enormous wolfhound bitch, whose name was Bruin, and who loved Gareth best of all, began wriggling out of his arms with purposeful heaves. She had decided that it was a fine morning, and it was time to gather rosebuds while she might. When she freed herself of Gareth and found a clear space on the floor, she first extended her forefeet and laid her chest on the rushes. She opened her mouth and said, "Eee!" Then she raised her front end and stretched her hind legs out in a direct line with her back. She said, "Meow," and shook herself. After that, she went to the window, put her great gray paws on the sill, and looked wistfully out. On a rocky ledge by the sea, she saw some seals. Now, if there was one thing which this dog doted on, it was seals. They possessed for her the fascination of mystery, of the unattainable. They were as film stars would be to us. She had never caught one. Bruin went over to Gareth and sat down beside him on her haunches. When she had wriggled out, she had left a hole so that she could see his face. She watched this face with its eyes shut and gave a whimper. She wished it would wake up, but it would not. Bruin gave another whimper and made a scratching on the floor with one foot. Then, very gently, she lifted this foot in the air and held it over Gareth's nose, watching him with her head on one side. But she dared not touch him. Instead of touching, she lowered her paw again and made more scratches. Also, she gave a sharp, impatient bark. Gareth slept on. Suddenly it was too much for Bruin. She leaped upon Gareth and scratched his face roundly. It was a downward sweep of her long claws, intended to pull his eyes open, because she knew that if his eyes were open, he would be awake. He was awake. He sat up like a jack-in-the-box and hit her on the nose with his clenched fist. "Ow!" he exclaimed with his eyes full of tears. "Ow, you hurt!" Bruin also said ow. They both looked at each other reproachfully. From every corner of the heap of rugs there immediately began to come out dogs, arms, legs, and heads. It was morning. Queen Morgause heard nothing as her 4 sons tiptoed down the stone stairs. Even the huge hounds went slinkingly past her door for fear of waking the poor invalid and making her much worse, if that were possible. Neither were Sir Grummore and Sir Palomides roused from their torpor. In the lower parts of the castle, however, where the kitchens and the buttery and the guard rooms were, the boys began to move less silently, and several of the hounds gave a few barks or squeals of delight. Meg woke up to another day of dishwashing. The aged retainer, who had been too old to march with King Lot, and who had been left behind to work the portcullis, he had to get up, naturally, in order to let the children out. He did so, grumbling a good deal, with numerous remarks about "way hey" and Anna, and so forth. The great gate rolled open with an iron thunder. On the sweet heather, the spring sun was too charming to be described. The 4 kilts and pairs of bare legs scampered upon it in a continuous flow of dogs, whose feathering sterns and trotting legs so repassed and crossed one another as to make up that strange ripple or mirage which always flows along under a pack of hounds when they are merry about their huntsman. "What shall we do?" asked Gawain. There were many small things to choose from, even if there were no big ones. There were the lochs and the hills to be visited. There were all the traps which they had left out overnight, and these had to be seen every day, or would not be fair on the creatures in them. There were the pellets, or craws, of owls, and the castings of hawks to be looked for and broken open. And by means of these they might be able to identify the favorite resting places of raptors which they had not actually seen, and perhaps catch them. Above all, there was simply the season of the year to be enjoyed. Gawain went to the traps. Gareth and Agravain went into the pine wood to search for pellets. Gareth felt the call of the sea and thought he would take Bruin to visit her beloved seals. On the way down to the village, however, he found a sheltered nook where some primroses were growing, and these made him forget about the seals at once. They were so clean and well-shaped and grew in such a profusion that he coveted their wealth. He began picking them, while Bruin watched him in disgust. An hour or 2 later, King Pellinore opened his eyes for the 2nd time. The sun had risen high enough to shine down on his face as he lay at the bottom of his drain, and for some time before opening his eyes he had been aware of it, but he had thought it wiser to keep them shut for a few minutes more while he arranged his ideas. The first thing was that he was evidently buried. He remembered this clearly from the first time he woke up, and he had a strong visual image of the grave in which he lay. Unfortunately, owing to the strength of Pudsy's mead, he did not remember being buried or anything about the circumstances which had preceded his demise. King Pellinore just peeped between the lashes of one eye, and then shut it again hurriedly. Yes, buried. You could see the mud walls. And if buried dead, you were always dead when you were buried. And if dead, what more natural than that he should have died for the love of the Queen of Flanders' daughter? In fact, he had been expecting it for some time. Probably he had died of a broken heart, thought King Pellinore sadly, putting his hand up to his right side to see if he could feel it beating. No pulse, broken heart, dead, buried. Well, she would be sorry, that was one consolation anyway. Here he was, buried, forgotten, no flowers. They had even forgotten to fill in the grave, and Piggy would be sorry when they told her. Perhaps she would come here one day, long off, her hair would be quite gray, possibly even white, and she would sit down beside the grave without knowing whose it was. She would have been picking some primroses, what? And then she would begin thinking of old Pellinore, lying away in his nameless grave, not even filled in, and she would lay her primroses down where she was sitting, and a little tear would run down her nose. Pellinore, she would say, or perhaps some little pet name like Pelly or something like that. Pellinore, where are you now? Why didn't I love you and see your merits when you were alive? Now it is too late. What? Too late, too late, too late. Never more shall I see thee tilting over the green sward among the buttercups and daisies. Never more shall I hear thy bird-like voice caroling away in the bonny spring. Poor Pellinore, oh, I am so sorry. What, don't you know? Too late. King Pellinore kept his eyes fast shut upon these melancholy reflections, but a small tear, to match the one shed by the queen of his heart, came out from one imprisoning lid and ran down into his ear. There it tickled him, and he opened both eyes. Looking down into his grave, there were 4 sad cherubs. Possibly they had come to carry him up to heaven, and one of them was holding primroses, which matched the color of his hair. King Pellinore blinked. Who were these cherubs? Why did they keep staring so? They looked extremely like the Cornwall children. Really, it was too bad. And the poor king, scrambling out of his grave, rushed confusedly home to breakfast. Gareth paused at the door of the queen's bedroom. He was afraid to go in, afraid that he would be doing something wrong. Yet he had picked the primroses for his mother, and he thought perhaps she would like to have them. He knocked with a sort of fumbling knock, and then feared that he ought not. "Come in," cried the queen in dulcet tones. Gareth went in with a red face and held the primroses out in front of him clumsily, dropping some. "Please," he said, "for you." It may have been the spring, or the song of the blackbirds, or the soothing effect of staying in bed. The queen was delighted. "Darling," she exclaimed. That was it. It was clear to her in a flash. This was why she had renounced the gay life and the homage to which she was entitled. This was why she toiled and moiled for her children, year in and year out, never complaining, always ill, giving everything, thinking of nothing but their happiness, sacrificing herself at every turn. It was mother love. She adored her children. For them she had given everything, was content to give everything. This was her true nature. That was the real picture of her, a sweet protecting influence for good, a sort of happy Niobe, surrounded by soft little mouths and hands. She shielded them, however ill she was, read fairy stories to them continuously, heard their prayers at night, arranging herself in a sort of statuesque marble pose. Like a monument to maternity, the queen wrapped the startled Gareth to her bosom. She kissed his puzzled, blushing face with a passion of mother love. She dandled and caressed him. She would not cease from crying until he was crying too. And that is the end of chapter 23.